We read in this week's portion by Yeshiv. It begins, Yaakov has come back after being away, not seeing his father for 36 years. His mother has passed away, and until this moment, he's endured tremendous grief. His wife, Rachel, his primary matriarch, passes away as a young woman. His daughter, Dina, is raped. His sons, Shimon and Levi, they go and they destroy a whole community. All the males who were circumcised, they kill them. There were a handful of people, and they're surrounded by all the nations of Canaan. And only through miracle can they survive, not to be attacked. And Yaakov says to his sons, until now, the barrel has been clear. You've made it murky, meaning clarity for Yaakov was essential in terms of his spiritual advancement. As a result of that, he was able to achieve things which you can't even relate to as a patriarch. And his dimension of patriarch would determine at what level the Jewish people would be at that moment and into the future. As a result of his tranquil state being disrupted, that's being impeded, and that's being interrupted. And that's what he said to Shimon and Levi. My mind is no longer clear. Therefore, my receptivity and capacity for spirituality and for prophecy is not the same. And therefore, the loss of the moment is a loss forever, because every moment is another moment of that level of clarity. And therefore, before he passes away, when he blesses the children, his sons, and he speaks to Shimon and Levi, he says, Orur apam kios. He curses their wrath because it's fierce. Because due to that wrath, they acted irresponsibly, not consulting with their father before they made the decision to annihilate every male in that community because of what they did to Dinah. And after Yaakov, he reprimands them, and he says, how did you do it? How did you put us all in jeopardy? He says, but we can't tolerate what they did to our sister. Well, what answers that? It's not an appropriate answer, meaning they were still consumed with that hate, and that's what dictated that decision. Again, being irrational. So what does Yaakov do? He curses. He doesn't curse them. He curses the wrath, the characteristic, their vulnerability to wrath, to that level of anger. Yaakov now, after undergoing and nearly being killed by the angel, he was injured and he recovered after meeting Esav on the way back, not knowing if he'll survive. He's finally back in Canaan. And the portion begins, he settles in the land of the sojournings of his father. Eretz Megurei Aviv. In the sojournings of his father in the land of Canaan. What is the meaning of a sojourner? Sojourner. The word Megurei and ger. A ger is a stranger. A convert to Judaism, although after the conversion is done, although it meets all the criteria of an appropriate conversion, the convert is still called ger. He's a ger tzedek, a righteous convert, but it's still a ger. Because relative to a Jew with the pedigree, he's a stranger. For instance, there's a law that a person who's initially part of the 12 tribes is not permitted to marry a person who is illegitimate, although they're a Jew. An illegitimate Jew, they're not permitted to marry. The Torah says, an illegitimate person who's born of a union of incest or adultery, although the child is a full-fledged Jew, that because of that level of illegitimacy, that child cannot marry into the Jewish people. But it says, Bekal Hashem. Kal Gerim Eino Kal. But the community of Gerim, of converts, are not called the community of the Jewish people, although they're Jews. So therefore, a convert is permitted to marry the illegitimate Jew. But the Jew who's an original Jew, who's legitimate, is not permitted to marry. Because relative to what the Jew is, it's a stranger. He settled in the land of the sojournings of his father. Meaning, as much as Canaan was given to Avram and to his progeny and all generations till the end of time, but when they lived in that land, they lived there like strangers. It was not their place. It's the sojourning. So simply, the way it would be understood, that is a question which is asked by the Maharal of Prague. We find that due to the covenant between the parts, the Jews were meant to be in exile for 400 years. As it says, Ger yir zaracha be'eretz lo lahem. Your children will be strangers in the land which is not theirs. Va'avodum, they will be enslaved, they'll be afflicted, and so on and so forth. And eventually, ultimately, at the end, they're going out with great wealth, with great possessions, which is the spoils of Egypt when we left. But if you make a calculation, we're only in Egypt 210 years. So Rashi cites the Chazal, the Midrash, but if you calculate from the birth of Yitzhak until we left Egypt, it was 400 years. Exactly 400 years when we left. But it wasn't bondage. What was the bondage? Avram was a free man, Yitzhak was a free man, Yaakov was a free man. And where's the affliction? That's questions asked by the Maharal of Prague. So Maharal of Prague explains it this way. Now, what was the state of affairs in Canaan at the time of Avram, at the time of Yitzhak, the time of Yaakov? We're talking about the population, the civilizations were all pagan civilizations. Paganism, adultery, incest, every level of spiritual of impurity. It was the abyss of impurity. That's what it was, because that's what the nations of Canaan represent. So a person of the spiritual capacity of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the holy patriarchs, that they are the location of the Shekhinah, as they're referred to as the Merkava. They are the chariot. They are the equivalent of the Holy of Holies. Could you imagine a person, the most refined prince, who comes from a pedigree of royalty, which is not to be compared, and he goes into a location where the people themselves are misfits at every level, corrupted, misfits, perverted, everything. But everything physically, the amenities are phenomenal. But what is the level of association with the people you have to coexist with? People that you have no relevance to, everything that they represent is the antithesis of every value that you possess. What is that? It's a level of pain and suffering, intolerable existence that you prefer to be in a dungeon rather than being associated with these kinds of people. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, because of the dimension of spirituality and the adversity that Canaan represented, they were in bondage. They were afflicted every moment of being there. Therefore, we're able to calculate the 400 years from the birth of Yitzchak, although we're not talking about physical bondage. They weren't enslaved, they had no masters, but the experience that they experienced was the most extreme level of pain and intolerance of the setting that they were there. That's the Maharal of Prague. So if that's your existence, and that's the way you internalize and process your surroundings and your reality, do you belong there? As much as the location is yours, it was gifted to you by God. I'm a stranger. It's like a person says, I'm a stranger in my own home. I'm a stranger in my own land. I'm only here because I'm supposed to be here, but I'm a stranger. the values, everything were not on par on any level. Therefore, Yaakov returned to the land. He settled in the land of the sojournings of his father, the land of Canaan. Yitzchak was so holy that even in his lifetime, God associates his name with Yitzchak. He's referred to as Elokei Yitzchak, which normally God does not associate his name with a person when he's still alive. God associated his name with Yitzchak. For Yitzchak, it was the sojournings. Yitzchak was a stranger in his own land. Yaakov's coming back to be a stranger in his own land. He's a stranger. There's no commonality between him and all these people. The Chofetz Chaim writes in one location, the Mishnah tells us in Pirkei Avos that this world is a prosdor, b'fnei ulam. It's a corridor. It's a corridor before the banquet hall, the large entry hall, what we call a pass-through. You go to Israel, and at one time you flew El Al, the plane, you'd have to go onto the tarmac, and you'd have to ascend the steps into the plane. They became sophisticated like all the other airlines, and they have a sleeve that comes out, and you walk down this corridor to get on the plane. And they have on the car, in this walkthrough to get into the plane, they have all kinds of advertisements or murals on the walls. And you think, maybe this is what it's all about. But you realize you stay there, you're not getting off the ground. You have to go through there to get onto the plane if you want to go anywhere. That's what it is. This world is only a pass-through. This world is only the proving grounds. You succeed in this world, then we talk moving to the higher level. So the objective is not this world. It's ultimately arriving after you've achieved and you've succeeded in this world. So the Chofetz Chaim explains with a beautiful allegory, phenomenal allegory, what we call a mashal. He says, in Europe, till today, there's a fair in Switzerland. It's called the Basel Fair. The Basel Fair goes back to the Middle Ages. In the Basel Fair, every conceivable commodity is sold there. So all the buyers who buy to sell, they go to the Basel Fair to buy at a reasonable reduced rate, and then they sell it. When they take back the merchandise, they take it back to their countries, to their communities, and that is the basis for their livelihood for the year. They buy cheap and they sell it for that profit. So people come there from Germany, from Poland, from Russia, from Lithuania, from all the various locations in Europe, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and they come to Switzerland, to Basel. But you realize there is an industry, and the fair is about 3 months. And if you buy well there, you could have a good financial year, the upcoming year. And if you don't buy well there, there's a question whether you survive financially the future year. So when you arrive there, you have to value every moment to take opportunity until you find the commodity you want, therefore to buy it at a reasonable reduced price to be able to make that profit. So what is an industry that's created? People who are restaurant people, culinary people, they set up restaurants. Because now you have people come from Germany, they eat a German cuisine. Russian, it's Russian cuisine. Polish, it's Polish cuisine. France, it's French cuisine. So you have multiple types of restaurants. Every conceivable type of cuisine is throughout Basel, representing all the groups coming from the various locations in Europe, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, okay? So one person, he meets his friend, 2 weeks before the fair is closing. So he says to him, so how did you do with your purchases? Did you buy what you were looking for? He says, buy. He says, I'm still trying out the restaurants. You got about 50 restaurants, different cuisines. I'm trying them out. And you know something? It's unbelievable. They're outstanding. Even if you go to the countries, the culinary capability is beyond. I haven't even thought about buying anything yet. So his friend says to him, are you out of your mind? You came here for one reason, to buy cheap. So when you go home, you're going to have a means of support. You're going to have merchandise to sell to be able to support your family and to cover whatever your expenses are. How could you be so foolish to get distracted with the cuisines of the fair? You're still visiting the restaurants. Are you unstable? Are you demented? He says, you have 2 weeks left. You better give every moment that focus to purchase as you should purchase. So the man says, I hear what you're saying. Whatever that is. We come into this world 70 years, 80 years, God forbid, maybe less. We don't know when that time, the checkout time is. We don't know. But every moment we live in this world, it's a moment of challenge. And that challenge has infinite value. Of course, when you challenge and you take the initiative, make the right choice, the value of that choice has borders on the infinite. That's eternity. Person says, I'm going to go take golf lessons. I'm going to fly down to Fort Lauderdale. They have golf school down there. And another year I go to tennis school. And then I go for the opening in Scotland, because there they have a golf course, one of a kind in the world. And all the pros go there. And then I go here and there. And then what about yacht? Yeah, got to belong to a yacht club. And especially after you've gone to Choates and to Harvard and to Yale, and you have all these relationships, you can't just let them go to waste. But you missed the boat. What about you being a Jew? What do you think God put you on this forsaken earth for? To row down the Thames against whatever it is, against Oxford and whatever the universities in England are? Is that what it's all about? You're here to what? To be a Jew, to meet the challenges of a Jew. Every moment has infinite worth. What are you wasting your time? This world is only a pass-through. It's a corridor. You're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to enter and be worthy to be able to have the means to go into that banquet hall. Chavetz Chaim gives another phenomenal mashal. He explains it. He says there was this person who had a piece of property. They wanted to build a hotel, but the property was shaped was very difficult to build a hotel that's really able to make a lot of money. Why? So he gets the best architect in Europe, and he looks at the property, and he comes up with a design, an architectural design. However, in Europe, the way it worked, that the money that hotel people made were from the rooms, not the corridors in the hotel. In Europe, Jewish hotel people, they allowed the poor to sleep in the hallways of the hotels. The rooms were for the patrons, and the hallways were for people who were destitute, who had nowhere to sleep. They wouldn't let them sleep out in the winter, be exposed to the elements. That's what they did. And also, they would allow them to sleep in the lobby. So the money was the rooms in the back of the hotel, okay? So this architect comes up with a design because the awkwardness of the property, and he designs a lobby. There's no lobby in Europe which is ornate and as magnificent as this lobby. High ceilings, chandeliers, with all the amenities and decor. It's out of worldly type of setting. And then he builds the rooms in the back. The rooms are tiny rooms, literally claustrophobic. You go into these rooms, you have to take medication. I'm not sure before or afterwards. That's how small these rooms are. The walls, you can touch one side with each hand, and the roof and the ceilings on your head. The hallways are magnificent, well lit, okay? So finally, he's there. The ad goes into the paper, open for business, says fellow hotel people come and visit. They walk into the lobby. They've never seen anything like it. They said, this man is going to be a success. And they're breathless. He says, now I'm going to take you to the back. He takes them to the back. They can't believe what they see. This man must be insane. Creates a lobby. The cash cow, which is the rooms, nobody would pay for these rooms. Who would want to be in these rooms? But he says, well, look at the hallways. They're so wide. But they said the hallways, that's not where the money is. The money is in the rooms, in the hotel rooms. But look at the lobby. It's breathtaking. He says, but you don't make money in the lobby. That's not for the patrons to pay for. The same thing. The world is beautiful. The Rockies, the Alps, the ocean, the Pacific, the Atlantic, the fish, the what? The preserves in Africa. You pay $100,000 to go on a safari, and you got your own natives in your Land Rover Jeep where the mud is up to the doors, and you got the vultures overhead. Nature like you've never seen it, but you realize that's not what it's all about. This is only a pass-through. You don't generate income. The only way you generate income is when you make the right investment and you create that residence, which is the equivalent of a mansion, and that residence can only be built with Torah mitzvahs, no other way. Otherwise, you're wasting your life. There's a famous story with the Chofetz Chaim, and the Rabbeinu Bachya depicts it almost identical, verbatim to the Chofetz Chaim. The incident, the Chofetz Chaim was world-renowned to be a holy person. His blessing, if he gave a blessing, the blessing came to fruition. He was a man, even the anti-Semitic Poles saw him as a holy person. And whatever he touched was blessed. And there was this American Jew who originally came from a Lithuanian background. He heard so much about the Chofetz Chaim, and he's a wealthy man. And his dream was to visit Rodin, which was the small community of Chofetz Chaim, to visit the holy rabbi. He comes, makes the trip, travels in first class steerage, the boat, and he finally arrives in Rodin. He has to go on a horse and buggy to get there, or a coach. There's not even a train. Train tracks weren't even late to get there. Comes to this little town, this village. The streets are not paved. And he's told that house is the home of the Chofetz Chaim. He sees this little cottage. It looks like a hovel. And he knocks on the door, and he's like amazed. He's taken aback. Chofetz Chaim is a prince. How could he live in anything less than a mansion? He walks into the house. One chair doesn't match the other chair. Rickety table. The bookshelf is a few boards knocked together with few books on the shelf. Nothing to be impressed. And he says to Chofetz Chaim, he says, I'm amazed. A man of your stature, such a holy rabbi, a prince of Israel. You should be living in a mansion, in a palace. And yet, it's so ordinary. I'm taken aback. I can't believe it. And this is this wealthy man speaking to him. So the Chofetz Chaim says to him, I want to ask you something. Where are you staying? I'm staying in the inn right down the road. He says, could you describe me your room? He says, I got the best room in the inn because I can afford it. He says, I want you to describe me your room. He says, curtains. He says, the curtains, they're faded. They're partially shredded. That's what the curtains are. And what about the washing stand? Well, it's a little rickety. What about the washing bowl? Well, one of the handles are broken off. And what about the bed? He says, you realize it's an old bed and the springs are coming out. And what about the carpet? Carpet's worn, faded. He says, a man of your wealth stays in such a room where you can afford anything. He says, Rabbi, but you must understand, I'm just passing through. I'm only passing through. Chofetz Chaim says to him, I want to explain to you something. I'm also just passing through. That's all. And that's the reality. The person who's the tzaddik, all this has no value unto itself. This is all opportunity. Its value is opportunity. Opportunity is challenge. You meet the challenge, you have the success. You think Forbes 500, being number 3, being in competition with Bezos in Amazon, or these people, Gates, that's success. You know, with that, once they check out their wealth, they can't take it to the grave with them. And it's all material. This is only the pass-through. The only thing you could take out of this world is only Torah mitzvahs. That's it. If you meet God's agenda, you've scored big. You're the ultimate success. You're beyond number one in the Forbes. You're God's special son. That's what it's about. The Avos HaKadoshim, the holy patriarchs, they were strangers in the land. A tremendous wealth. Every one of the Avos HaKadoshim. Look at the gift that Yaakov sent to Esav to try to appease him, to diffuse his wrath. And this was a pittance. But you know something, it's all meaningless. When Esav says, I almost have it all, Yaakov says, I have it all. I have it all. He says, who are these children? Who are these women? They are the children that God graciously gave to me. I'm a beneficiary of God's beneficence. That's what I am. I'm here only to do what God wants. That's it. As much as I have, as little as I have all that I need. Of course, the objective is only doing what I'm supposed to do, is to do the will of God, to meet the challenge. That's in the first verse of this parsha. He settled in Eretz Megurei Aviv. It was the sojournings of his father. When the Jews came to Egypt and Yosef instructed his brothers to say they're shepherds, and they've been shepherds for generations, that's all they know. And they said, Logur, and Yaakov says to Pharaoh, Logur Bartzbano, we came to Egypt to sojourn here. Sojourn, lo lishtakea, not to settle here on a permanent basis. That's not what we're here for. All we're here to pass through. That's all it is. I always say, people used to say, this was in the 50s, I'm an American first, I'm a Jew second. We live in America. We can be patriotic because we have to be appreciative for what the United States did for us in terms of freedoms, opportunity, many things. But who are we? We're Jews living in the United States with all the privileges, with all the amenities, with all the opportunity. But who are we? We're Jews. That's what we are. Regardless of where we are, we're Jews. The time of the Spanish Inquisition, the Chazit Yavitz writes that the Jews were given a choice. They could convert to Christianity, retain all their wealth, or leave with their shirts on their backs. That was the choice they were given. Who do you think left? The simple Jew, the Jew who was at best medium income. The Jew didn't have much, although he knew he's going to be exposed to all the travails and the dangers of being not in a protected location. They left regardless. Who stayed behind? The people of status, the people who had connections to the government, people who had wealth. They didn't have that pure faith that the average Jew had, that the ordinary Jew had. And therefore, they believed and convinced themselves, deluded themselves, outwardly will be Christians and private will be Jews. These are the Marranos. Not sure if you know, the word Marrano means, I'm not an expert in Spanish, I don't profess it even to be, but Marrano means a pig. The Marranos were considered traitors. They were traitors, even though, I'll be a Jew in private. I'll hold my Seder in the basement of my palace. You know something? God doesn't want you to have a Seder in your palace, in private. Just leave. Because even outwardly, you're not permitted. Because the Jew has to give his life. Because Christianity is idolatry. You're not permitted. But the ordinary Jew, the simple Jew, who had the pure, simple faith, he picked himself and left, regardless of what that will bring, regardless whether his life will be in jeopardy. But it was never a consideration, ever, that in the open you live as a Christian and in private you live as a Jew. Never. Because they saw this is not our land. This is not where we belong. We're not Spaniards first and Jews second. But many of these people, because they felt they were proud Spaniards, They're a Jew second, therefore they succumb to this temptation and not wanting to give up their power and their wealth. And they came up with this new concocted type of religion, Judaism, Marranos, in private with Jews, public with Christians. But ultimately, many of them were flushed out by the Inquisition. And ultimately, they were burnt at the stake. And many of them did do tshuva. They repented at the end. And they couldn't even flee. You know, there's no creature who walks the face of the earth who has the ability to acclimate themselves like a human being. Whenever we find ourselves in a situation, somehow, because the survival instinct in a human being goes beyond comprehension. For instance, we, thank God that it were brought up in a whole different reality of society, of era. We don't know what the Holocaust was, thank God. But people who lived during the Holocaust in Europe, in the concentration camps, used to speak to people. They wore a pajama, which was about a half inch thick. They wore wooden clogs. The temperatures they worked were 40 below zero. There were times they were working in snow up to their waists. Besides being malnourished, besides being beaten, how do you survive this? How do you survive it? The human being was created with a survival instinct that for the sake of survival, you endure anything. God forbid any of us should even have relevance to any semblance of what that was ever in our lives. But that's what these people did. It's called acclimation. We can acclimate ourselves to anything, almost, up to the point where your life is taken. But you push that envelope to the nth degree to survive. That's called acclimation. We ourselves could convince ourselves, although we see the dangers of that, our spirituality is in danger. But if we want something bad enough, we'll go there. Initially, you may be taken aback because it doesn't meet your standard of religion, belief, spirituality. But because you want to be there, for whatever reason you want to be there, ultimately, you're going to acclimate yourself. Initially, you may be taken aback. Gradually, little by little, we get drawn into it. And we're lulled. That's part of the acclimation. The key is never to be lulled. Yaakov, when he went to Choron, he was concerned. Yaakov, the patriarch, the most special of the patriarch, he was concerned. And he prayed, watch over me from the 3 cardinal sins. Could you imagine? Yaakov even has to worry about adultery. He has to worry about incest. He has to worry about any of this. There's Yaakov. He's still a human being. Being in an environment, you never know what an environment could do to you. You always have to be a stranger in the land. I don't belong here. There's a question I asked. Moshe Rabbeinu had 2 children. He fled to Midian. He married Yisro's daughter, Zipporah. He had 2 sons. The first son he names Gershom. The second son he names Eliezer. What does Gershom mean? It's to connote Ger ha'isi be'eretz nochriya. I am a stranger in a foreign land. That's his firstborn. The firstborn is always the most special of a parent. The second son is Eliezer, Elokei Ovi Be'ezri. The God of my father came to my aid, and I was saved from the sword of Paro. What is being saved from the sword of Paro? Paro, originally, because he was informed that he killed the Egyptian, he was arrested. And he was brought to court, and he was found guilty, and he was going to be decapitated. God performed all kinds of miracles that Moshe could escape. So sequentially speaking, which event took place? Moshe finding himself in the alien society, a stranger in a land which is foreign, or he was saved from the sword of Pharaoh. Being saved, the sword of Pharaoh came first. So he should have named his firstborn Eliezer, Elokei Avi Bezri. The God of my father came to my assistance. Was saved from the sword of Pharaoh. And the second son, I'm a stranger in a land which is not mine. So why did Moshe switch the order and name his firstborn Gershom to connote I'm a stranger I'm an alien in a foreign land? Because Moshe understood that the first and foremost, for the sake of survival, you have to know you don't belong. No matter what your level of accomplishment is, you don't belong. And you have to tell yourself endless times over, I don't belong here. This is not my place. Every moment you want out. And only by being overtly in that direction, self-convincing that this is intolerable, only then could you survive it. Because the moment you allow yourself to see it in a positive vein, immediately you're vulnerable. You're going to be drawn into it. And once you're drawn into it, then we speak about acclamation. We speak about justification. And you never know, and as we always say, it's a slippery slope. You never know how quickly you go down that slope. And you don't want to go down that slope. You want to stay on top of that mountain. Therefore, the firstborn, which is the most beloved to a parent, is Gershom. Moshe, as great as he was when he fled from Egypt, he killed the Egyptian with the name of God. That's how spiritually tuned he was. Nevertheless, I'm a stranger in a foreign land. I'm an alien here. I don't belong here. But you realize they're not going to let you join the club. You know something? Thank God. They see me as some kind of archaic human being. You know something? Thank God. I don't want to be seen as part of your society. I'm a different part of a different society. I'm from a different era. I'm a different being. Not to be influenced. You know, there's a story, and end with this, I mentioned I have another moment. There was an organization that was founded in the 50s. It was called Pe'ilim. These people, they went and they fought the missionaries in Israel. And the one who headed the organization, he was an American. He was a student of Rav Aaron Kotler. And he moved to Israel. And it was Kiruv. Because the missionaries were preying on the Moroccans who came over impoverished, and they offered all kinds of financial assistance and medical accommodation, many things, clothing, and they were drawn into this. So they fought the missionaries. And they were in Kiruv. And he had to fly to Yemen as a representative of this organization. This is before the level of anti-Semitism in Yemen. And he lands in Yemen, and he has one of the ministers of the government meeting him in Yemen at the airport. So if you ever see pictures of Yemenite Jews, firstly, the hair, the texture of the hair is different. It's very coarse. It's not wavy. And all Yemenite Jews have what we call side locks, and they stick out like Brillo. That's the way they stick out from the sides of the heads. So the minister sees this white Caucasian, and they're very dark, the Yemenites. They have beautiful features. He says to them, where are your peyot? Where are your side locks? Where are they? So he had what we call peyos, but they were tucked behind his ear. And he takes them out, and he shows the minister that he has peyos. So he says, why are you hiding it? Why are you ashamed of it? Why did you display it? The Jews in Yemen display it. Why did you display it? You understand what that is? Why don't we display it? As much as we look Jewish, we want to be accepted by society at some level. Whether it's for business reasons, other reasons, whatever, it doesn't make a difference. But once we want to be seen that there's something which we have a commonality with society, you realize at some level, we become impressionable. We could be impressed. But if you take a position, there's no way they're going to have anything to do with us because of who we are. And you overtly display that difference between you and them. If that's the case, you don't have to, there's no acclamation because you show it clearly you have no interest. Yaakov and the Avos HaKadosh, the holy patriarchs, because they internalized the evils of what Canaan represented, the paganism, human sacrifice, adultery, incest, witchcraft, and every perversion that existed. Therefore, they never considered ever that they're being tortured. It's a spiritual bondage, and they're experiencing like a physical bondage. Therefore, when Yaakov returned, he returned to the sojournings of his father because he experienced it no less than his father experienced it in the most negative level. To be continued.